All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Jason, and I'm going to be the webinar referee for today. Here's what you're going to get. Since we value your time, this will be a fast-paced webinar. I'll be keeping time for each of the 7 ways to improve communications to a limit of 5 minutes. When there's only 1 minute left, you're going to hear this to make it a little bit more fun. So one little addition to that, though, is that if we have a really good question from the audience, we will pause the timer and have that discussion. We want this to be interactive, so please, the last thing we want is for the 3 of us to be talking. We want to hear from you. From there, if you take a look at the GoToWebinar Q&A section on your little control panel, you'll see a little button that says questions or chat. Either one of those is fine. Feel free to use either one. We're going to keep an eye on both, and then we'll get started. Now, for a little extra housekeeping, we're going to talk about factory workers today, who they are, and then what are their most common needs. We're going to spend some time addressing the coronavirus too. Given the urgency and just how topical it is, we found it necessary to adjust today's presentation and really harness the crisis management section. We'll then close with the 7 points with a discussion on the best practices we've seen to make a substantial impact on the factory worker experience. And then after the webinar is over, we'll share the slides and of course the recording. There's going to be some other links mentioned throughout, and we'll post them in the chat, but we'll make sure that you get copies and links to everything after the fact. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this session. Before we introduce the speakers, though, I just want to help you understand who we are and why this is so important. So we're a mobile-first communications platform. That means we provide an end-to-end mobile and desktop experience, and our entire organization staff base is built on improving how you reach and engage those hardest to reach employees. It's our passion, and today we're going to share with you some of our key findings. Now, let's turn it to the speakers. I'm really excited here. First off, we have Carsten. He has worked as an editor and marketing director for several German newspapers. He eventually joined Viessmann in 2009 and led the digital communications team. In his role, Carsten introduced the employee app, I believe it's V2Go, if I'm not mistaken, and was highly involved in the company's digital transformation, but also has worked on other app projects from numerous sizes and organizations. Carsten, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sadly, Tiffany will not be joining us. Last minute, she had to pull out given an emergency meeting at her organization, but fortunately, we got to spend some time with her offline and learned a lot from her, and I'll be sharing her input throughout. Lastly, we have staff-based president and co-founder Frank Wolf. Together, Carsten and Frank bring a ton of experience to the world of information sharing and communication, and we're really happy to have them here. Okay, let's get this party started with you and get a question going here. So right off the bat, I want to ask you all, how do you communicate with your employees today? Okay, and the poll should be launching. There it is. All right. Oh, I see the numbers ticking. This is exciting. We're going to give it just about 2 more seconds. Let's see here. I'll give it, let's see, let's give it 3 seconds and we'll go 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's over. Now let's see what we got. Okay, share results, and here they come. Oh, interesting. So 53% of the people participating today use an email newsletter. 15% use a printed newsletter, 10% have digital signage, 19% have an employee app, and 3 just shout out loudly from the top of a building. I love it. All right, great. Let's move on to the next slide. Perfect. Okay, so who are your factory workers? We're going to talk about relating to the boots on the ground first. And Carsten, why don't you lead this off?
Yes, thank you so much, Jason, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure. So to keep this fast pace, just go back to the poll, and with the 3% of the people who shout from the top of a building or shout from the rooftop. And actually, this is what we call in communications broadcast. And a lot of the problems of reaching blue-collar workers or people on the shop floor is that we don't have a clear understanding of what the levels of communications are. And the first level we have to keep in mind is broadcast. So if you just skip to the next slide, please, Jason. This is basically, for example, what Viessmann has done in the past, town hall meetings, sessions where something was not actually shouted from a rooftop, but someone was on a stage and presented content. This is important, and this is also important, but it does not really reach out to the blue-collar workers. The next level of communications would be interactivity. Interactivity meaning a form of communication that gives the employees the opportunity to give feedback, to add comments, to like an idea. It's not really a full-blown discussion, but it's an easy way of giving feedback and of starting something of a conversation. And the final level would be collaboration. That would be in the end when everyone is working together in a team. And if you think about your blue-collar workers, you're probably gonna realize that most of the time they have been just addressed by broadcast communications. But if you think about what they have in their pockets, their smartphones, this is all about interactivity and collaboration. So they already use Facebook or Instagram. They have all those digital channels and they have rich experience, everyone. But on the other hand, in their company as blue-collar workers, they just get the broadcast information, and that feels a little not enough for them. So they don't really get the appreciation they want and what they can expect from their private environment. So everyone's on Facebook, everyone is engaged in all these discussions. Why not the company? And this is where you need a hub. You need a platform. This is, I think, the basic idea. We've talked about digital signage already. We talked about email newsletters. But what we didn't talk about and what was not in the poll question is the idea of putting all of these channels into one platform and make that available to everyone on the shop floor. And I think that could be, so if you want, Jason, you can show this big crowd in the next slide. So actually, this is where everything comes together. And I believe this is much more helpful than printing out things or shouting from the rooftop, really going where the people already are, making use of communications habits that are already firmly rooted in everyone's behavior, and then really transferring that into the corporate environment and trying to get the blue-collar workers on board.
Question. Can I ask questions? Yeah,
absolutely.
You can always ask.
Carsten, I know we will have the topic later on, and I think it's very interesting when you say, okay, we talk about broadcast, and there's interaction and there's collaboration, so there's different levels. The question is this always the expectation of blue-collar workers from your experience, right? So I see this from our experience. There are certain, like, also frontline employees who say, like, guys, I get it, like, leave me alone, I do my job, you know, I don't want to interact, I don't want to collaborate. Like, to what degree is this something that everyone is going after? Or you say, okay, it's a generational question, it's a, are there any patterns that you see?
Yes, actually, there's a pattern, and thank you for that very good question. I believe there's always there are always people that are not interested in joining discussions. There are always 5% or 2% of people who do not really want to become part. But everyone else, even the people who are reluctant, they already have the conversation patterns from social media embedded in their mindset. So if I want to convince people, I need to use structures that they already know. And even the people who are critical also know these patterns. So there are people who are critical, but I think with you using structures like a hub, you can convince them more easily than just by sending out emails. So okay. You say, I understand your problem, but here is a way you can give feedback. You're welcome to share your insights as well. You can do that. And I think that's more convincing than just handing out leaflets.
Excellent.
I think that's
not generational.
Yeah. Maybe to give you one number of a benchmark study that I heard last week at the Intra Team conference that I was attending in Copenhagen. They did a big benchmark study around comms, and they asked one very simple message and a question like, on your news, what percentage of companies is allowed, where people are allowed to comment on news, like as a basis for interaction? And they said right now it's 2020. 1/3 is allowed. So 2/3 of company don't even have this implemented that people can interact. So I think for a lot of companies, especially here, when we talk about frontline employees, will be at a very early stage, I think. So that's why it's very interesting, Carsten, to get your experience, like, because I know you guys are like a couple of years and before that, right? So they will be at a pretty early stage. First, how can we reach people at all? And the second one is like, if we reach them, like what sort of interaction are we willing to give? And I think we have a couple of points today also how to deal with negative comments and so on, to discuss this in more detail,
yes,
right? I think that's
come up in more detail later. Yes.
yeah, perfect. That's a great kickoff. And I want to jump in on this with like starting the reach. And typically the reach is also around like emergency, crisis, business challenges, where you really want to say something's happening. I want to go out and get a message out, right? And maybe also get people to confirm this message and measure who actually got it. So that's like the basic challenge that you see, and I think that's something we wanted to talk about anyway, but now with the coronavirus, like we are all in the middle. I don't need to tell anyone here, we're all in the middle of this, where we say, okay, that's really important, and especially for frontline employees, because it's so hard to reach them, right? If we move one further, typically what we see on the front line, especially the factory floor, a big part of communication is paper. And paper can be in a binder, paper can be on a wall, paper is a handout that you have in the morning briefings or things like that. We see a lot of terminals. And actually, I've seen we missed the terminals in our questionnaire. Maybe the terminals would have scaled pretty high as well with you guys. So we have the terminals. Terminals have a couple of challenges as well. They're not very personal. I hear people often say, hey, what are you doing there on the terminal? Like, don't you have anything to work, right? So that's this thing coming up. And digital signage is actually pretty common, maybe not so much on the factory floor itself, but in the break rooms and so on, right? So these are the typical channels. And what's very interesting, if we move on, if you think about channels, reach is not the only thing that really like defines if a channel is good or not. So if you look at what actually does and creates a good communications channel, you can say reach, like, is it possible for employees to actually get it? So in many cases, they don't have an email address today, or they don't have access to an intranet. That's one part, but the other part is like, is this in real time, or is this a printed newsletter that comes every 4 weeks, right? Does it allow interactions at all, or are interactions, is this just a one-way broadcast? Can I measure it? Can I do storytelling? Does it help me to include rich media? Can I have videos in their podcasts, or like even just a picture gallery? Is targeting possible? Targeting is a huge topic around, like, for specific audiences, specific plans or location, and of course, like, what's the cost like for a channel, right? So if you look at this, there's actually a surprising amount of channels that's available right now. With all of these have some strengths and some challenges. What we see, and that's like pretty much pure reason Staffbase exists, we see it makes a lot of sense to think about digital, because digital is more real-time, is more measurable, and it makes a lot more sense to think about also which media to engage people and really get them what they need, because after all, what they have in their private lives is an entirely different experience than they used to have at the company. So to give you one example, and I think the coronavirus, if you go to the next slide, is a not great. We all know it's everyone is suffering from it. Here's one example that is kind of a typical best practice that right now staff-based customers have done in the Corona crisis, and we actually reached out to a lot of customers. We have customers in Italy, in China, in the US, in UK, in Germany. So we've got a pretty good impression what's going on and what they are struggling with. And typically what we see, they have two challenges. One is get the message out in real time, right? So guys, tomorrow home office, guys, tomorrow plant will be closed earlier, any new regulations going on, right? They want to send this out with instant notifications because we've seen statistics that if you do that, 75% of the users see this within 1 hour, right? So it's really instant. They want to target audiences, they want to measure it, and they also want to have them acknowledge certain messages. So that's all good, and a lot of comms goes around that. But here's the thing that really overwhelms communicator, which is the thousands of questions that come back, right? And it's so much into detail about, like, if I'm in the home office, how do I X, Y, and Z? How can I access my PC? If I have to cancel this trip, where do I go? I asked our own CEO today, like, do we have an insurance if I cancel? I have to cancel 2 flights now myself. Do we have a travel insurance that we get the flights back? I don't know, you know? So a lot of these questions come in, and what you want to do, you want to create one place where all of these questions are, so people can go there. And what you see on the left side on the phone is like this a blue button, is pretty much saying all information about the coronavirus, right? And people can go there and have all questions. They can submit questions. They get the latest information. So everything in one place. So I think a lot of communication around a crisis is part of 2 things: reaching out, and also have this single source of truth to keep the whole organization aligned and have like the glue that holds the organization together in this time. So I think that's hopefully a good example on what good crisis communication can be, even for frontline workforce. And if we go one slide further, and that's my last slide, and I
wanted to jump in one thing. There's one question that came up while you were talking, Frank, and I also really want to hear from Carsten. I feel like this topic is completely reasonable to give a little extra time on because it is such an urgent topic. One of the questions that I saw immediately that got my attention was, can you talk about translation? Because you mentioned several different countries that are, you know, if you, let's say you're one person or you're maybe several, like a dozen people or more, you're working with people with multiple different languages. How are you seeing that being overcome?
Actually, as this is going to be the next stop on our agenda, we could just move there if you want. So that would be the next one slide, number 18.
Let's press pause on that and just make sure that there isn't anything that either of you wanted to talk about specifically regarding this coronavirus as it relates to today's discussion.
Actually, I think I would like to continue with the coronavirus, but we could just talk about the challenges of a multilingual workforce in that context, because Frank has already mentioned that we have to have the information in real time. So in the old days, we had a situation that some decision by management was made, and if you don't go on the rooftop and shout, you just print out something and put it on a notice board, and there is a time lag, and the communication does not get across very quickly. This is one aspect. But the other aspect is that in most international companies, we have a lot of nationalities, a lot of ethnicities working together. So when at Viessmann I started out with the app project, first we went to different locations and we scaled the app to, I believe, 8 or 9 languages, including Turkish and Chinese and Finnish, but that was just on the locations in those countries. When we came back to Germany, what we found out is that we have a lot of nationalities within Germany as well. So we have a lot of Russian people, Italian people working in Germany. So, and if they have Italian or Russian as the native language, it absolutely makes sense to have translations ready. And the better the translation, the more things that are translated, the more it gets understood. So you have the question of reach, really reaching out to everyone. You have the question of relevance, and you have the question of really getting the meaning across. So, and the problem, of course, is if you go too further, please, the more languages you have, the more work it is. So we started out and really translating things. We started out and said, let's do it in German and English because that is some kind of common denominator for everyone. And then we're going to add additional languages if it is useful. But we couldn't add enough languages, and translation takes so much time and is so important that it does not have to be perfect, but it has to be there. So if I have a crisis communication in English and German, we could do that in our team. But if I wanted to add French, I would go to a translation agency and lose a day. So that really made clear for us that we need to have instant translation. And in crisis communications, it is not important that the sentence, please stay at home, use your home office. It is not important that it is grammatically correct, but the meaning gets across correctly. And therefore, I think the importance of instant translation, this is really, if you skip one further, this is really something that I really love to see. This is actually a translation of a sign, but it makes sense to think about signs in a company context as well. So everything that's important, to my mind, should be easily accessible. And if you skip, go one further, please. I've tried to summarize this a little bit. So there are, if it comes to translation, 5 points, I believe. The first I mentioned is if you translate manually or with an agency, it simply takes too long. I think we all agree on that. The second point is you cannot really decide what needs to be translated. So Corona crisis communication, this is clear, but there's so much else going on in an employee platform. So you cannot really decide where to put your focus on. And the importance, that is number 3, of translation increases with the number of production workers. So if you're an all office outfit working, let's say, in marketing or PR, chances are very high that you can use English and German or just English and you're done with. The more production workers you have, the more nationalities you will have. So the larger that share is, the more important instant translation gets. And the same rule applies to the number of languages used in your organization. So if you already have 2 languages, like for example, Wiesmann or my current company does, they have German and Polish. So it's just 2 languages, but if you have 4, it even gets more important. And final remark on that side, it's also about comments. So this is also why I believe automatic translation is important for blue collar workers, because it's not just what you broadcast. Remember the levels of communication, it's about interactivity and about collaboration. And therefore, you also need the translation of the comments to be automated. And just on the next slide, very simple advice, just do it. It's just a screenshot from the app project I'm just working on, Frank. It's a Polish news item there, and you can see already the German caption Übersetzung anzeigen, translation. So it is something that I like to introduce into every blue collar communications project that I do.
And I think that's the to sum this up, it's just the good thing about technology in general that we have today, and the very good translation frameworks that are out there to say the whole, like it's such a big hassle for communication in a complex environment to deal with it, and now it's there. And I maybe this one point that you pointed out, which is really interesting, that the common translation, it's, you may say, okay, yeah, you can translate comment, but actually that's a huge thing, because it means, especially for global companies, it brings employees together, right? So you have one global announcement and people start to comment in different languages there. They can see each other's comments, like there's really a global conversation going on, right? Which is that never happened before, right? And that's now there, that's at their fingertips, and I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that's actually an example that I got from, I was talking to someone at our organization, and they said that was an experience that they've never had before at any other organization. Just being able to see that translation, they were able to work with people that they probably otherwise wouldn't have worked with before. and they're collaborating on tasks that they probably wouldn't have been able to collaborate on before too, which is just really quite powerful. One other question too that came up was with the use of translation, and also just going back to the corona and how they interact with each other. One of the questions is about what if your folks, the boots on the ground, are not checking their phone regularly? Like, how do you even overcome that fear of, well, okay, great, let's talk about mobility, but what if they're not checking their phone? What if they're not supposed to be checking their phone? How do you even begin to think about that?
There are a lot of answers to that question. The first one is, of course, that you need a commitment from management that using an employee platform is something that is really appreciated, and that everyone is allowed to do that. And I'm very lucky because in all of the app projects I have worked on, I always had backup from the management. And I said, we're going to introduce that. And even if there is a company policy that no private smartphones are allowed, you can always break that up and say, okay, it's not allowed, but you can use it during breaks. And you can, if you're a desk worker, you can use it for this employee app exclusively. So there are always exceptions that can be made. And of course, that is just one part of the solution. The other part of the solution is, of course, to use the reach that you have and to put valuable content in there that the people really want to check. So actually what I always like to create is some kind of fear of missing out. So yeah, there are a lot of ways you can do that with a staff-based platform. Fear of missing out could be just the meal plan for the canteen, or it could be the fear of missing out some important event or some important option to collaborate with other people. But I think the idea is that you have to put relevance in there, and then the people will go to the platform and use it, especially the blue-collar workers, because they don't have that many other options. As a desk worker, you have your intranet perhaps, or you have the emails, but if you're working in production, you just have that one. And so the more action you put into the platform, the more easily it will be accepted.
Excellent. And now we're on topic 4, which is he said what? How to deal with negative comments.
Okay, that's also my part to take. Negative comments actually are good. So what happens if you introduce an employee app? You're always going to start out with 20% of your workforce that is eager to use that, and you have 80% just hesitating a little bit, and then over time the number of users gets higher and higher, and people will be reluctant at first to comment, and after a certain amount of time they will start commenting, and even negatively. And I think the first important takeaway for me when that came up was that I always wanted to put the story first. So if someone posts a comment, I have to find out what is really the thing he wants to communicate. So I don't let it go. I just ask the person, can you give us some more information on what is your problem, or what do you mean by your comments? So taking the people seriously, asking them, how does your comment relate to the story we are now telling? We had an example. Another company, we introduced a regular survey among employees, and there was some doubts that this was really, let's say, from a data protection perspective, that really the procedure was correct. And there were some negative comments. And what we did, first of all, we always tried to get more information from the people. So can you please explain more clearly what is your pain point? And then, of course, then using that feedback as a basis for further content. So just then saying, okay, we're doing another post on that one, we get back to you. So then you close the discussion in the comments and open up another topic and say, okay, we have negative feedback on this project. Here is what the colleagues said, and please now it's your turn to say how we can do that better. So I always like to think about negative comments not as something that is really criticism, but it's just another act in a story. So just as in a Hollywood movie, you get an introduction, you get some crisis, and in the end you've got a happy end. It's always negative criticism can always be put into that kind of narration and then make it understandable. And the funny thing is, if you do exactly that, what happens is that all the cynicism and all the sarcasm gets automatically left out. Because if you ask the people to give more information, you also get on a more neutral level. You reduce the amount of emotions in the discussion and you enter some kind of collaboration. So this is why I always like to think of a negative comment as a start of a new story.
And this means
slide,
like
please.
chance, like, sorry, Carsten, for interruption, because I think that's a really, really cool point. So you were saying suddenly they feel you take them serious.
Yes.
And say, I hear you, like, here, tell me more.
Yes.
And from that, like, this also moves them kind of out of like the hiding or whatever, right? Where they just can throw in something. And I understand, and that's how I see this implemented everywhere. It's not anonymous. So you always do this with your name. So you know who did that, and you of course follow up. That's one thing I hear. And the other thing I hear, communicators are struggling a lot more with, especially in the beginning, getting comments at all, because people are like hesitant to do that, right? And by far not so much about like there's like hundreds of negative comments. That's not the case, right?
No, that's not the case. So actually, in about 4 years at FISMA, we had about 2 or 3 critical comments that really needed to be followed up.
Which
so
I would say in comparison is already above benchmark from what I hear.
Yeah,
to be honest.
so you won't get a lot of negative comments, but actually this is a bad thing. Allow negative comments if you can use them as a start of a story. But
yeah,
and this is why I've selected this this slide here. It's good if you can make it tangible. So you can talk about transparency, but you have to have some kind of touch point in the organization. You can have some kind of artistic installation where you can make it experienceable, so that you can really see this transparency is not something that we just talked about. You can really go to the app and you can really publish a comment, and you can make it tangible by interacting. That is one thing. So someone posts a comment. Ideally, you have the CEO answering or the comms team is answering. But even more important, and that is exactly the point, you need to share the microphone. So if it's all just once again broadcast, the comms team broadcasting things, and then just people giving comments, you know, you have the comms guys, most of them have a PR background, they are professional, they can write, they can sometimes do videos, and the people are they're not up to that. So if you're a blue collar worker, you might hesitate to get into a discussion with the comms team because they are the professionals and you're afraid of not looking good. Perhaps you don't have the right grammar for your answer. But if you share the microphone, if you make a lot more people co-communicators in the company, the more you share your microphone, the more the people will like to post comments.
And I understand you mean share the microphone, not so much on the stage as in the picture here, but really also in
really it's a metaphor.
Who contributes and like as a metaphor, right? Yeah.
It's a metaphor. I think the picture is really nice because you see me sitting there in the left, but I don't have a microphone. I have a headset, okay? But you can see people started a discussion just as in any discussion, you can sit at the sidelines and just watch the discussion. And this can only happen if you have the guts to really, metaphorically speaking, hand over the microphone and give the microphone to the people who post the comments. And then the people won't be afraid. It's not just the comms department, the specialists, it's everyone who's taking part in communications. And that's, I think, the one secret. And the other one, next slide, please, is of course never to delete a comment. So this is really an old story that we had an app for 4 years and we just deleted one single comment, which was in a notice board where a person wanted to use the employee app. He mistook the employee app for Tinder, and he wanted to invite some ladies from the company to a nice weekend in a hotel. So this is something where we had to delete a post. And it's really an exception. You shouldn't do that a lot. Everything else, critical comments, we just do not delete it. We just take it at face value. We start to spin a story out of it. And I think then you're going to introduce another level of communication. Then you're moving it down from the broadcast to the interaction and finally to the collaboration level. And then you have that integrated communication setup that I personally like to work in.
Okay, I think because we looking at the time, we need to move on. Like the one thing about deleting the comment, I think if you ever need to delete a comment, as you said now, you would write in a new comment and say, hey guys, here was a comment. We deleted it because it's against the guidelines.
Yeah.
And that's why if you have any further question, please reach out, right? So that would be the correct way.
Yes, but I think this is really important. You should not expect too many hate comments, because this is not social media. You're in the corporate environment, and the people know that it's their co-workers that they're going to read the comments, and they're not going to publish any hate posts because the supervisors can see it.
And to sum this up, I think that the one challenge now is you guys heard a lot about comments and negative comments and deleting comments and so on. It's close to never happens.
Yes.
If it happens, it's a very good way. There's a good way to deal with it. The best way, if you somehow scared of comments, ask other communicators who are already doing it. I've never heard somebody who said like, oh my God, that's a huge issue. The only thing that happens, people think it's going to be an issue. So don't ask us, ask Carsten, because he's seen it live, and ask other communicators. You will see it's not an issue, and it gives you a lot more things to talk about and more stories to tell. Okay, so next.
Excellent. So now we're going to talk. I actually have the next two sections, and for the sake of time, I am just going to really monitor the clock, and then we'll be caught up. So right here, this is self-explanatory. I don't need to read it for you. Understand that there's a lot of folks that are going to be leaving soon. And I think pretty surprisingly, this L2L report says that actually, believe it or not, the youngest generation, Gen Z, is actually 7% more likely to consider jobs in manufacturing, which I believe is about 12% higher than the actual industry standard right now. So what does that mean? How do you prepare for these folks? So if you jump over to the GoToWebinar control panel and you look under handouts, you're going to see a file named Staff-Based Boomers to Gen Z -V0. That is a report that we put together with Reagan Communications, all about that very challenge. And I just want to talk about three key things that we have seen that is the most successful with reaching a younger generation. These folks are digital natives. So what does that mean? That means their entire world has existed with this, right? So they didn't know the world before this, like this didn't exist. And I think that's really important. So what that means is there's a very specific expectation. So mobility obviously is number one. Really need to have some information sharing must be mobile, right? Dialogue, what does dialogue mean? Well, I can tell you that I work with a lot of younger generational folks, and they expect to have constant communication with me and other leaders of the organization, management, etc. It's not a, your typical, okay, we're going to meet once a year to do your annual review and see how you do. That is unacceptable behavior these days. It is a daily and weekly report. I want to know how I'm doing. How can I improve? What is the roadmap for my success here? All of those things are so important. What's valuable for you is that these are people that want to give you feedback, which is invaluable for you. This is information that you didn't have access to before, except for running like maybe an ENPS score, maybe once a quarter. These are people that are constantly providing you information. And lastly is community. You really, I'm overwhelmed with joy by how many folks just love spending time with the people that they work with, even after spending all day with them. And it's amazing. And so the encouragement to share opportunities to get to know people on more of a personal level is exactly why you need to do that. And I would also just add that inclusion and diversity are two very important topics with that. And a lot of the times diversity gets kind of like the crux of it. And I would argue that the hard work is not necessarily, saying, hey, we're open to everybody. It's what is the plan that you have internally to make sure that you are clearly inclusive. And that involves everybody. So really think about that type of planning. We have some really good content out there. I think in the actual guide that I'm sharing too, we talk about it. But I would highly spend some time looking there. So when you actually have, how can you actually help improve this experience for the folks, the boots on the ground that we've been talking about, right? Number one is creating this relevance for, I'm sorry, I'm just setting my timer for my second point here. So this is the picture I see of what communicators and HR leaders and people in finance and IT, the circle, the one head of a coin that they see. And then on the other hand, you have, let's say, Susie here. She's a plant worker. What is that? What is the information that's being shared from Sandra mean to Susie, who is receiving this information? How does this information get shared? I think most importantly for Susie is her me stuff, right? She needs to know what her PTO requests are, her payroll, et cetera, benefits planning, information that relates to where she works specifically. So not just what's going on with the organization, which is super important to her, but what's going on in the organization within her actual plant. So,
And then,
oh, please go right ahead.
Maybe to jump in, Jason, because like we had this question before, why are people using this? And I think this picture is exactly the answer here, right? The more you go to this local stuff, the more you are with the me stuff, the more you give them a reason to actually use it. And the more they have this reason, the more you have a channel that works. And that you can leverage. Maybe not, you don't need this every day, but you need to get the messages across in times of a crisis even more. So the basis is exactly this understanding between what's important from a local, from a central perspective, but really what do people care about from a local one.
So
Precisely.
Actually,
go right ahead, Carsten.
So actually, it's the other way around, Frank. It's not coming from a top-down communication and then building the local and the me stuff under it, but actually it's the other way around. You build the local and specific content for the blue-collar workers, the me stuff, and then you put your strategic messaging on top of that.
That's and would you, from your experience, Carsten, if you would have to put a percentage number from, like, let's say Viessmann on this, like how would you rate this?
I think it's the bigger the company, the more top-down communications you get. Right, Viessmann, it's probably about 60% that is top-down, 40% that is bottom-up. But I think we're moving in a direction where we can see a turnaround. So I think in the long run we will have more bottom-up communication than top-down.
Oh, that's it. And we to give you another example from like one DHL, which is one of the largest organizations worldwide, is using Staffbase, and they are so big, they are forced even more to think from a local market level. So a lot more stuff is created and also like responsibly wise, organizational wise on the local level, and like maybe 20% or even less is coming from a central level. A lot of our customers actually create the word glocal between global and local to like get across that this is kind of a trade-off between two. And local can mean, I think, Jason, we have this somewhere in the slides here. Local can mean different things, right? So it can be a factory, can be a country, it can be a business unit, whatever, right? So I think most of the people here in the audience have this for their own companies, like what local actually means. It's even more granular if you go to, let's say, the retail organizations. There's even more down to the shop where they say that there's what's local happen, but we also have like sales regions and other things, right?
Yeah, it's important, Frank, in this context that blue collar, we talked about production a lot, but a blue collar worker could also, in a sense, be someone working in a retail store and not really connected to the headquarters. So blue color does not really mean that the people get their hands dirty. It's just more that they are disconnected from the, let's say, headquarter or from centralized communications. So perhaps we should coin a new term and call them disconnected workers.
We are like, there's so many, there's frontline, there's offline, non-wired. I hear all of this.
Yes.
So, and that's
I think
by the way, there's still like, we don't have enough time for this, but it's very interesting if you look into different verticals. Typically in a planned comms world, like planned communications, we have a lot of people on one place, still a couple of hundred or thousand in one place. So comms is even a bit easier compared to retail, let's say, because it's so spread out even more, right? And this kind of like, how do you know what's going on? What happens if you have a really bad shop manager at one place that really like is toxic for the culture? How do you get to know that this is happening, right? So technology can help there as well, and you get the pulse feedback and things like that. This doesn't happen so much on a plant level because there's just too many people involved, you know. So very interesting discussion, maybe for the next webinar.
Yeah, and just to pipe in right here. So also attached here to the handouts is something called the Communications Playbook for Manufacturing. And we talk extensively about these two theories, about the centralized versus decentralized ways of communication and the benefits and the pros and the cons from each. So please, I encourage you to go to handouts and download that so that you can have access to it. Moving on, this is, please go right ahead, Frank.
So like the last one, because I think for communicators is so important. There's really a big current discussion about like how communication understands its role, and the like kind of the modern communication moves towards being a facilitator, an enabler for others, and not being like, I'm the one that's writing up all the stuff that the CEO tells me and I push this in the channel. Modern communication is much more around like, I understand the structure of this company, like who are the influencers, who are the people that other people listen to, like I travel to the locations, I want to see this, I want to get to know what's going on frontline, and then I enable others, and I'm in the middle. I'm also still producing content, but much more in a different role than before. And I think that's so interesting for this role and for the future of the whole profession.
And taking that imagery, right, of what that role looks like. So even if it's a project that starts, and so just to quickly go, like I'll just go back just for a second. In most cases, when we have these discussions, Sandra lives in this world right here in comms, right? Or maybe she lives in HR. But then she's like, she wants to start sharing this information to Susie. And she realizes how many other departments are absolutely essential to share that critical information. But then even further, to Karsten's point, we find out that Susie has a voice too. The microphone gets shared and the information starts happening, and there you start to see the magic where this top-down communication just doesn't cut it. It's the bottom-up communication that you see the most value.
And even further, because, and I know we have this as the last point, you've seen comms in HR. There's a huge development in terms of both things concern the employee in the same way, and they are like in many cases separated, and they are moving towards each other. We see this in like DHL done this, and a lot of others are doing this right now, where they say comms and HR come together as an employee experience function, because the employee doesn't care, do I get stuff from HR or from comms? It's around my workplace. So I think that's all about this last point, right?
Yeah, actually, thank you. Yeah, and this is actually a good picture. I hope you know those two guys. This is corporate communications as it used to be in the past. So the whisperer to the powerful people on the throne. So the left guy is the comms guy, was me in a former self. I think if we go back to the beginning, where we said that the roles have changed and that the people on the shop floor also have Facebook, and they also know about interactivity, not on an academic level, but they intuitively know about collaboration and about feedback and about comments. So this doesn't cut it anymore. And if you go to the next slide, actually, this is corporate communication these days. So we have young people connected via smartphone, sharing information. They do that via Facebook, they're doing it via Instagram, and they should also be able to do that in the company. And the one thing you have to do in the end is you have to, next slide please, unboss the comms team. So this is really, corporate communications is no longer a communications police or FBI or you name it. It's about enabling people. It's about empowering people to just, you can go one further, please. Just go ahead and start a discussion. Just push people out of their comfort zone and tell them, okay, you can do so many things within this company if you just have the courage to share what you already know. And this has to come, it has to start top down, but it does not end top down. It has to become a bottom up thing. A key element for this, and we haven't talked about this yet, it should be another webinar, Frank, is about celebrating success. So if we celebrate success, we have a very good always good stories to tell. And the more good stories we tell, the more engagement we create. So let's just go to the next slide, please. Celebration is one really important thing. Just giving a thumbs up or a high five to the people. You can do that in person, which is also great, but you can also do that digitally. And if you give the people the opportunity to share their success stories, you're also going to create extremely valuable content and you're going to create relevance. And in the end, and that would be my last slide, if you take everything together, it's all about being colorful. So colorful and diverse. So we need a lot of voices. I believe there is some conference in Berlin, which is also called Voices, and it's by Scarface, and it's a good name because we need a lot of colorful voices in corporate communications, but within entire organizations. And the more colorful we get, the more voices join, the better the communications is going to be, and this will all in the end lead to a better company, to a better culture, a workplace. And I think this is why starting top down, creating interactivity and collaboration and going over to a bottom up culture is so important.
And I think maybe to take your example from sharing success stories, typically this is the content that's most commented. And that has a lot of very positive comments. So if you want to warm up an organization with comments, like people often ask, like, why don't people comment? The easiest thing to do that, like share success stories of coworkers, or people like 30 years in the company, whatever. You will see a lot of comments, and it's a great topic to get this started. Great. Oh, I hear the sound. I think we are pretty close to the end, right, Jason?
Yes, there's one question before we jump in here to the last poll question that I thought was so good, was can you both just talk about the cultural change in organizations that is needed to get to this point that you're talking about, to find the color, find the diversity? Where does it come from? How do you address it?
3 words: trust. No, actually 2 words: trust and cojones. So you really, sorry for speaking English, you really need to have the guts and to try things out, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. So every successful employee app is based on a lot of mistakes, and the more mistakes you make, the better you get. So just try things out and take it from there.
Excellent. So based on your own situation, what are your top priorities? Do you want to work on the channels that Frank talked about? Do you want to figure out a better way to tell the story, even if it involves comments like Carsten talked about? Do you want to have better crisis communication planning? Do you want to have more focus on future generations? Or are you just really just looking to reduce your workload? We're going to give it just 3 more seconds, and we'll
actually multiple options allowed, or just one?
Only one.
Okay. So yeah, like pick the one that's most.
Yeah, and it's a clear winner right now. I can see.
Reduce my workload, or
No, actually, I want to work
Oh.
on the channels.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I would have said reduce the workload. Right.
And then
But
better
that's
story
number
time
3.
telling was
Better
in.
story.
Yeah. So, and then third place was reduce my workload. Very
But there
interesting.
is bad news for everyone. If you do it just as Frank and I described it, you're probably going to create more content, and there is going to be a lot more going on in your organization, but it will not reduce your workload. I think it will change the way you work. So you will stop being top-down communicators, and you will be more like trainers or coaches. So reducing the workload, I'm not sure about that one, but I'm really confident that the entire comp setup is going to change.
Excellent. So thank you, Carson and Frank. I just want to quickly summarize what we talked about. I think that some of the takeaways I heard as I was taking notes was the boots on the ground don't want to be broadcasted to. They want to interact. You need a hub. Please share the microphone. Let people be co-communicators. I loved that, Carson. I thought that was great. Let everyone contribute. Don't force everyone to sit on the sidelines. Be colorful and diverse. The more voices, the better. In times of crisis, it makes sense to just be to have an open and clear channel that is accessible, and try not to create more panic, but to actually allow there to be an open dialogue. I think it plays well into everything we talked about, comments as well, etc. And if you really want to reduce those channels, of course, that just start etching away one at a time. It's not going to be everything all at once. In order to get there, just focus on some small wins one at a time, and that's going to get you to the success plan. Again, everybody, thank you so much. Please go to the handouts. There's 2 handouts there. One is on working with younger generations, or generations of all shapes and sizes, along with the communications playbook. This is great. The way we put it together was that we talked about a lot of the issues that we talked about today, and also gave you some homework, some action items that you can participate in. Further, we are doing some other webinars soon. We're going to be talking about the 5. If you want to go right now to staffbase.com/webinars, we'll send you the link, obviously. We have a great webinar on the 5 most important business values of an employee app. We have an amazing webinar on print versus digital, and coming soon. We have some really good content as an output of that webinar coming out. Frank and Laura does a great session on sending your intranet packing. Ooh, that's exciting. And then, of course, we have a really good on-demand session on how an employee app works for DHL. So we use those DHL as a couple reference points throughout the session. We have a really nice talk with them. Check it out. And then coming soon, we have a webinar on the coronavirus itself, just all about crisis management, and that will be going out. We'll be sharing it with you guys soon. And then we're going to be doing a session with just creating culture that everyone wants to work with as well. So please, if you're interested in learning more about Staffbase, again, we are a platform designed to take your communications to a different level. With the only mobile first option out there that offers it in the way that we do. Go to staffbase.com/demo if you're interested. I am psyched to see so many people still engaged in this session. Everybody that added comments, thank you so much. We are at the hour. We will stay on for maybe 2 more minutes just to kind of answer some questions, but thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to go through the questions now, but for those of you that do have to leave, please know that we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Awesome.
One of the questions here, there was a really interesting comment here. Let's see here about workers' exercises. Someone who puts the wipers to the C class from Mercedes doesn't feel responsible for the Formula One championship. But how do you connect them to that? How do you get them to understand their involvement in being part of that?
The wipers to the C-Class Mercedes. So I'm not really fluent in the Formula One language. But what I believe is that this is more about the basics for communications. What you need in a company is some kind of purpose, some kind of mission statement. You need to have some kind of common denominator for everyone. And I believe if you have the right strategy and if you have the right mission statement, then you're going to have a communication setup that will help you to communicate to different target groups, different content to different target groups. So we're talking about message housing here and about content planning for individual sub-targets group in a company. It's a very complex topic. It would also be good to have a webinar on that one actually, but I believe the starting point should be a clear mission statement. People first, for example, which is not a mission statement, but more an annual statement, but something like that. So if you have a company, don't know which one, who says we have a yearly mission statement that sets people first. And it is clear that if you take that over to the Mercedes example, and you can see that the people in the production line are also important. And you have to have your content items based on that one. So what you have to say as a message is not only Formula One is important, much more important, or just as important, is the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. So you guys are all important. That would be based on a people first mission statement, for example. So, but it's a lot about communication strategy, that one.
I would add the really aspect of storytelling here as well, because if you like taking exactly this example, if you have content and stories around your the racing team, like around the world, and that's very authentic and that's really targeted on the employees. And I know like they also bring the drivers in sometimes to the factories and things like that, right? I think that makes all the difference, right? There was a time when everyone thought like we don't need internal comms anymore because everything we do is external comms, right? And everything is the same. And exactly at that moment, you as an employee, you feel special because it's stuff that only you get to see and that only like people talk to you about these things, and you feel special. Maybe you get a T-shirt, maybe you can enter a game. A lot of our customers doing games around these, right? Like, and the top 10 winners can go to a race or things like that. So I think that's it's a huge potential for storytelling, for all these new media formats, for video, things like that.
One thing that I heard a lot of that was unexpected for me was a lot of our successful organizations find that when they start really thinking with these 7 steps, that they find that the people that they're most afraid of, the people that they're not communicating to, have so much pride and value in their organization, and they want to share that information desperately. I think I did one podcast with one of our railroad organizations, and they will do like this incredible work, and they'll take these beautiful, gorgeous pictures, and not because they're like it's just a nice picture, which it is, but they're so proud, and like, or something that represents the logo even of their organization, like, look how cool this is. I mean, and that's the stuff that really just starts skyrocketing with popularity. That's where that community comes into play, and I think that's where the secret sauce really comes from, the people that you're most afraid of. The next question, I love this question, and it's really too bad that Tiffany's not here because she is, I would argue, the master of this. How do you find your influencers within your organization amongst your employee base?
That's easy. Everyone is an influencer. So just a story. You can start with a concept like introducing brand ambassadors, and this is something that I was lucky to be a part of as well. And what we found out that if you apply for being a brand ambassador, other people start doing that. Some people apply. It's the usual 10% of highly motivated people. Then we switched it around and made everyone a brand ambassador at the introduction of the company. So we introduced a welcome day for people who just started in the company. And on the first day, we gave them the tools and the idea how to post content in the social media platforms. So make the people a brand ambassador on the first day, because when they start, no one is more motivated than on the first day. So just pick them up when they enter the company and just throw them in, and just so you're a brand ambassador now. It didn't come with your job description. Get used to it. Just do it.
I love that. There's actually we had a session with a bunch of HR professionals, and they said that on average, the first 30 to 40 seconds of someone's first day is essentially the measuring stick of whether or not they're actually going to stay at the company.
Yes, and believe me, I know that. Yes.
That's the power of onboarding. Maybe two other thoughts on this, because I think it's such a great question. One, if you have feedback channels like comments on others, you will see people comment, and people will show up where you know they do this more often, and they just want to do more. So you just need to, if you open up a feedback channel, you will see influencers. That's one thing. The other thing is, it's very interesting to look at specific topics. I always use this one example about like safety. An influencer is somebody who had an accident before, or a near miss, or somebody who really can tell a story. This is the most powerful thing you can ever imagine, except like the CEO shouldn't tell the story, but somebody who's been there and says like, hey guys, this is what happened to me. That's why safety is important. So I think the other question around influencers is like, who would be the most powerful person in this company to tell exactly this story, and then ask this one, right?
Love it. Last question.
Yeah, very good.
We still have almost 50 people here, which I think is amazing. Out of like the 500 people that registered, we still have 50 people listening in. That is excellent, in my opinion.
That's because so many people are in their home offices due to Corona.
The last question, and this is a really interesting one. It's like, we use bulletin boards, digital signage, morning meetings, and kiosks to communicate, but increasingly we feel the need for more disruptive comms because our shop workers aren't fazed by our traditional channels anymore.
Yes.
Any ideas? And she's in the apparel manufacturing industry.
Yes.
Thank you, Melissa, for a great question.
Kill your darlings. So really kill those duplicate channels. So if you have, just give you an example from the lunch or meal plan, which is a bit trivial, but it's still true. If you have a meal plan and you have an app, and you communicate the meal plan by email newsletter, or you have some kind of intranet. So what you could do is you could just switch off the intranet, you could just switch off the email newsletter and just put everything in the app, and then people automatically will go to the new platform. So obviously for political reasons, you cannot do that every time, but you should always keep in mind that if you have duplicate channels of communication to people who always use that, what they already know, people are always skeptical if something new comes up. And sometimes, just as the elephant in that slide I've shown earlier, you just have to push them a little bit, and just sometimes you have to take away the lolly. It's really true.
It's interesting, Carsten, because and to point this out, if you're a company talking to your customers, typically the role would be fire on all channels, right? Use every channel you have for your messages, and you should be everywhere,
Multi-channel marketing.
Customers pick it. That's a marketing approach, and what you're saying from an internal comms approach would be try to narrow this down to one or two like more powerful channels that make also life easy for you, that are like more powerful in terms of what we discussed about, like their real time and things like that, right? And which also makes this easy. And it's not just the manufacturing worker, it's also like the one that's sitting on the desk, right? Which makes it easy for employees to say there are not a couple of channels and I find some things there and the phone list is there, but that's the one place I go and there's everything.
Yes, and there are some myths actually, and I don't know how that came to be, but for example, you see a lot of companies using digital signage or these kiosk or terminal systems. So one really truth from my experience is, it's a bit of truth actually. So digital signage is okay for broadcast communications, but it's not enough because there is no interactivity and no collaboration. And the terminal systems don't work at all. They also only work for broadcast, because nobody's going to post a comment or write something standing before that machine if the supervisor stands behind him or other people pass by. Nobody's going to access personal things or HR related me stuff on such a machine. So this is also a myth that a terminal in production is useful. It really isn't.
It's I think it's still widespread in production from what I hear, right?
But it is not really useful, and we should use the terminal that everyone has in his pocket.
One question that actually before, I know I said I was going to be the last one, but I have one more, and we still have 43 people. It's like listening in intently, and I've never seen so many thank yous in a session before. So let's do
bonus question, Frank. This one is for you.
One question is, some of the and this relates to the question you were just talking about. It's some of the channels that are traditional or old school, if you will, they're working still. So how do you separate that from knowing that you want to evolve or change or disrupt, as that comment said so eloquently? Where do you make those decision points between?
That's actually the whole story about broadcast interactivity and collaboration once again. So what I just do, I just look at the channel or the platform and I ask myself, does it broadcast? Yes, it does. Does it collaboration? Yes, it does. Is it possible to have some interaction? Yes, it does. So then let's keep it. So every time, and if you look closely, you will see that there are not many platforms that offer all three levels.
It's still, I would answer what's obvious and with moving more generation, and I'm not saying this because like we build an employee app, but I think that's everyone agrees, like the core of the whole comms interaction world will be something around digital, right? There's still, let's take print and printed magazines as an example. It still makes sense to use this to some degree. For instance, if you have some storytelling stuff, you have like a anniversary, you want to do a Christmas issue, or you want to, you have something specific, or you have a new big product launch and so on, and you want to add something else. And there are a lot of other formats, like an event would be another format, right? And what you still want to do is mix these up because they have certain strengths. And if you want to, like Carsten, you guys had 100 years, I think, was it 100 years of Viessmann?
Yes.
Which is a huge company event. And when you do that, and when you say this channel is actually perfect for what you really want to do, you will also see that the channels don't compete with each other, but they help each other, right? So you can plan the event with the app. You get a lot of content out of the event that you can go back into the app. You can do some live streaming stuff. So I think it really makes sense to combine them at a certain point, but typically you have, like, say, that's the leading platform where a lot of this happenings is happening, and then I put in some specific things. People still love face-to-face, right? Just because you have a digital platform, don't tell your CEO, don't do the plant tour. They should still go to the plant, talk to the people, be visible, but you can use it to ask questions, get the discussion going, and get a lot of round stuff really happening.
Yes, actually, that's a good point. What you're describing is the exception, or that is what you build on. What I was trying to say is that you need to have a basis, and the basis should be as streamlined as possible. And in an ideal world, focusing on one employee hub, one single point of entry, single point of truth. And of course, you can have, if you have a company anniversary, there will be some kind of yearbook or some kind of printed documentation. But this all builds on what first you need to achieve a single main channel, and then of course you can do the face-to-face, you can do the town hall meetings, you can do question and answer sessions. But this is something that builds on it. In external communications, you're going to start firing away through all channels. And I think the difference is in internal communications, you're focusing on one, and then you're seeing where can I build on that a little bit and add something to that?
Perfect.
But I think
Yeah.
that's the setup. I think, and I think we both agree, it's just coming at this point from two different directions.
I think that's a very good last sentence for the webinar. Just thinking
That's
about
one.
the time
Yes.
of our audience.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Carsten and
Thank you.
Frank, for your input. I
It was
could
a pleasure.
honestly listen to the two of you talk for another 3 hours, but for
We
the
could.
folks that have to go back to work, like myself and everyone else, thank you so much for your time. Again, for those of you that are still on, you'll get access to the recording very shortly. Please share it with your colleagues. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. If you would like to learn more about Staffbase, staffbase.com/demo. A lot of great folks that would love to talk to you more about this. Thank you both so much for your time. Thank you everyone for your incredible participation and amazing questions. I wish you all a wonderful day. Stay healthy and take care.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.